What's up to all my product founders and creatives out there? This is your host, Lisa Montero, and you're listening to the Visual Commerce Podcast, where founders, creatives, and brand leaders bring you insights on how to tell better visual stories of your product in 3, 2, 1. So we are here with Casey DeWorkin, founder of Sylven New York, a luxury plant-based footwear company. Casey, thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
It makes me so excited to hear about what you're doing because your positioning in the footwear market speaks volumes to your innovation, plant-based footwear. And I had the privilege of being able to hear Casey's story when we first started talking. And for the sake of time, I'll keep my questions more centered around the journey to how you got to building your visual narrative. But honestly, the entire journey of Sylven from conception to product development to where you are now is so intriguing. Casey, could you start by giving us just an overview of Sylven?
Absolutely. So, as you mentioned, we are a plant-based luxury footwear brand. And so we create high-end designer footwear out of Italy, and we focus on really nature-derived materials. So we're working with things like apple leather, which is a vegan material made from apple food waste out of Italy. We work with things like coconut husk insoles. We've got soles made from tree sap. We use linings from wheat and corn. So we're really trying to kind of recreate a shoe from the inside out, focusing on really renewable, earth-centric materials.
And could you explain the reason why you guys use the term plant-based instead of sustainable?
Totally. This is one that's exciting because being 100% plant-based is a new it's kind of our newest evolution. We've been working with plant-based materials for the last few years, but as of this year, we decided we're going to take a 100% stake claim in being fully plant-based and fully vegan. And using the term plant-based really speaks to, no pun intended, but like the nature of what we're working on. So we had spoken a little bit about kind of the term vegan and the term sustainable, and neither one of those things is really a comprehensive term. So like there's really no definition for what sustainability means, and it means different things to different people. And similarly with the term vegan, like not everything that's vegan is sustainable. Just basically vegan means anything that's not derived from an animal product. So there's a lot of plastic, a lot of petrochemicals, and a lot of really harmful elements that still can be labeled as vegan, but do not stand as sustainable. And then similarly for sustainable, it doesn't really denote whether or not you're working with vegan products or leather-based products. And we had previously been producing both. So now plant-based is sort of our, like, this is our way forward. We are working specifically with plant-based materials, which for us are vegan and made from as close to nature as possible.
So cool. And I really love that you guys kind of shied away from that term sustainability, not because it's not impactful in itself, but it's just used so much now that it's kind of hard to define even what that means. So plant-based itself already kind of gives you that leg up and people going, huh, what is that? What does that mean? And can I know more about that?
Totally. It's nice to not have to, like, yeah, I feel like sustainable is a word that's been co-opted, and so it no longer really has its own meaning. So to be able to break it down one step further, I think we'll still have to use the term sustainable to describe certain things, but to not have to use it as like our overarching term and to be a little bit more focused is already a really exciting step for us.
Absolutely. And could you give us some background on what your education or experiences, past experiences were that kind of led you to this point?
Sure. So, in terms of education, I studied design. I went to Drexel University in Philadelphia. And I started in a fashion merchandising program because I loved the fashion industry, but didn't really know what I wanted to do within it. And then while I was in school, a new program came along called product design, which can also be known as industrial design, depending on, where you are in the country. And I just, like, my brain lit up. I loved this type of thinking. It's really not fashion focused, but it's a little bit more user focused and kind of creating an aesthetic for a functional object. So those two kind of combined forms of this product design and fashion merchandising merge was kind of exactly where I sat. So that's a little bit about my education. And then professionally, I knew when I was in college that I wanted to be a shoe designer, and I worked almost exclusively for small shoe brands within my professional life. Has a couple of accessory brands, a couple of handbags here and there. But footwear was exactly what I wanted to do. And so I worked within really, really small companies and kind of learned the ins and outs from even non-design perspective. Like I actually did a sales and operations role for a long time, and was working with buyers and overseeing a warehouse and kind of the things that have prepared me more to be a business owner now than anything creatively, maybe in my path had. Or I guess it's kind of a convergence of everything altogether.
And what I would love to back up too is I know when you and I talked, you discussed Italy and how that kind of made started the spark for Sylvan as well.
Totally, totally. I did a really amazing study abroad program when I was in school, which I highly recommend that everybody, get a chance to travel when they can and when the world opens back up. But I had been in Italy at the time. I had not yet like really. I think I ended up changing my major specifically to product design from fashion merchandising, but I was kind of on the brink of like, okay, what is it that I want to be doing? It was kind of what was the catalyst for me to decide I wanted to do footwear design. But I went to this like amazing leather market in Florence. And, we no longer are making new leather products, but when you really distill it down, it's like, it's the craftsmanship. You see these artisans who are selling, handbags and shoes and belts and gloves from like this world renowned Italian leather. And you see these materials and just what they're able to create, and I just feel like it clicked for me that I was like, "Oh my gosh, at the total center of like product design and fashion is footwear and accessories," which is not an avenue I really thought to pursue prior. So I feel like that was kind of my moment to be like, "It's shoes. It's always been shoes."
And I love how all of those past experiences just come together to bring you to the now. It's always amazing to see stories like that unfold. One thing I would love you to really expand on is how did you develop the sentiment of the brand? What is Sylvan, the core values, the reason for plant based, the reason for luxury? How did this all come about?
Totally. So, backing it up even further, I happen to be born on Earth Day, which I joke a lot that I think sustainability is in my blood. But even as a kid, like I remember being 15 years old and like championing the environment. I wanted my school to be better at recycling, and I was like, why don't we have a better like industrial recycling system at our school?
Yes.
And there was no one spearheading anything. So I was like, I am going to just create an environmental club. And so I started my high school's environmental club, and, was always really, really forward thinking in terms of like, all right, how do we create community initiatives and how do we get people thinking about protecting our planet? So that kind of started for me at a very young age. And separately from that, I was enamored with the fashion industry and was like, all right, here's a really cool iteration of like how to express yourself and like how to kind of connect deeper with who you feel like you are as a person. But I never thought to combine those two things. So
Mhm.
those were kind of separate circles in my general like, life space. And then you and I had the chance to speak a little bit about my story, which I'll try to like I'll try to sum up as best as I can, but I kind of had a series of really, really intense events happen over the course of my life, and I think it was like within a year period, I had an apartment fire and lost all of my possessions, and am grateful that I had my health and the clothes I was wearing that day, but like my entire like everything that I owned was in my apartment that was in that fire. So that was kind of one of the first things to spark, okay, well, if you only have one pair of shoes in your wardrobe, because I was still working at the time and didn't own any shoes, and shoes were what I loved. It's like, what would that shoe be? So like that was kind of the first seed planted of like, okay, well, now I get to approach this kind of from a design centric space of like, okay, if I only had one pair of black boots that was versatile enough to take me from like a meeting to then going to hang out with friends afterwards, what does that shoe look like? And then about a year later, I had a really a person very close to me in my life pass away very suddenly, and it kind of was another huge moment in my life that made me take a step back from the fashion industry and what I was working on, and kind of think about like, okay, what am I excited to work on, and what is it that I'm missing in my professional life, because I'm getting tons of signs from the universe that like life is so incredibly short, and all we can do is control, so few things in our lives. So, like, what's going to bring me joy? What's going to get me out of bed in the morning? And I kind of revisited that initial, like, oh, do you remember right after the fire when you were rebuilding this concept of, what would be the first shoe you owned? Like, I kind of revisited that thought process and then just started to build out this dream list of, like, okay, well, what would those first shoes look like? And what else would they have to be like? And, how can I approach this from, like, as least of a, like, the industry itself tends to be very wasteful. So, like, how can I approach fashion through minimizing waste? And how can I kind of bring all of my own personal values, which are very rooted in sustainability and trying to protect the planet, and bring that into a high end fashion space, which had been my professional career and the things I was working on previously. So it was sort of this moment, kind of a few moments in my life that, like, kind of jolted me to be like, all right, there's no time like the present. What do you want to do? And how are you going to do it? And so I keep coming back to, like, these lists. We talk about them as like dream lists, where
Mhm.
it's like, all right, what's like the best, what can you invent? What's the best case scenario for you? And then if that's something you're excited and passionate about, what does it take to make that happen?
Absolutely. And that's the reason why I love to hone in on this question, because this is the heart of your brand story. These are the points you go back to that feed the why of what you do, and people want to know the why. They don't just want to know the what and the how. And I think the why is also what really lends itself into creating a solid visual narrative. So now you have the task to convey plant-based and luxury, which are two giant storytelling elements. How do you get your audience to understand and connect with this through the visual narrative?
That's such a great question and something that I love to express. And we sort of do it in two different ways. So there are certain things that we do that are just focused on being a high end luxury product. So, that's evoked by, beautiful imagery, really high end imagery. So, that's making sure we're keeping things really minimal. And maybe that's just, a model on a seamless backdrop, and all the attention is focused on the product. And then conversely, because we have so many materials that are plant-based, that, like, we work with apple leather. So of course there's tons of apples that show up in our imagery, because we really want to tell the story of, well, what is apple leather and what do you mean your shoes are made out of apples? So sometimes we have images that are just kind of more material, and we call them ingredients, even though, where they're not edible when they're in the footwear, but there's so much food overlap. So sometimes we're shooting and it's like there's apples and coconuts and it's more still life focused. And so we're able to kind of tell the product story through props and prop styling. And then sometimes we combine the two. So it's fun, and we get to be a little bit playful and iterative, where sometimes it's, what's the focus? And really it's kind of goal oriented, is where do we see these images being used and what does the need? And then when we can blend them, that's sort of where I feel like the magic happens.
Absolutely. And I think that's an ideal thought process when you're just thinking about these visual campaigns. And I do really love on your site how you have a mix of product forward photos that are showing the luxury and the style. And then you have those photos where it's a sneaker and the apple and the coconut. And it kind of makes you go, hey, why is there an apple and coconut hanging out with the sneaker? And I feel like it's that curiosity that's what engages your audience.
Totally. I am also like, I love still life, and I love, like, highly stylized, like art directed, prop styled images. But I often have to kind of remind myself that footwear are it's such a personal product. And, like, you really do have to see shoes on a model to really understand how they work in three dimensions, and, how they're going to be worn, how they're going to be styled. So it is kind of even a challenge to myself to make sure to blend those two. So I'm glad you feel like they're equally represented, because I kind of have to go out of my way to not just shoot, like, if I could just shoot shoes on apples and coconuts all day, like,
Yeah.
you know, I could be happy for a little while.
And now you just dropped a huge campaign on Earth Day. Can you explain the making of that campaign? Was that level of photography the first time you were really doing something like this? How did you build the visual story? What did that whole process look like for you?
Totally. I love building out big campaigns, and we very rarely get the chance to do so. And this Earth Day campaign was the launch of our very first sneaker, which I've been working on for almost 3 years. So like this project is so near and dear to my heart. Um, but I wanted this campaign to like I was probably not the dreamiest client because I was like, I need this campaign to do like a little bit of everything,
Mhm.
and I managed to put together a fantastic team, which I feel like is really important. Is like you got to know what players to bring in and who's going to be able to elevate your message. And I instead of typically I'm kind of the art director and creative director for all of the campaigns we do. And I kind of took a step back and I brought on an art director for this shoot. And her name is Rachel Wang. She did a phenomenal job. So I kind of approached Rachel and said, all right, I'm launching this sneaker. It's fully plant based. It's going to be the world's very first apple and coconut sneaker. So it's really important we speak to those materials, but it's also a really high end sneaker. So I really want to make sure that we have this really luxe high end styling. And but we're also not working with like a traditional model. We're working with a vegan chef. So I was like, I'm just gonna throw all of this on your plate, and I'm just gonna expect like I've kind of asked for the world and found a team that was able to deliver and work with me on it, which was incredible. But this one campaign really was able to do so much for us, and we were able to have a collaborative partner, and the face of the campaign was a big part of the campaign. We worked with this awesome girl. Her name is Chrissy Tracy. She's Bon Appetit magazine's very first vegan chef, but that was a huge part of the campaign for me too, which was finding a partner that was going to kind of embody not just the sneaker and its style, but also be able to speak to the materials and the innovation, and coming from the food space and the vegan food space when we're working with food based ingredients more or less. It was just sort of this perfect convergence where we had a brilliant photographer. His name is Daniel. We hired a prop stylist. And so it was kind of a little bit of everything so that we have this one campaign that's able to speak to all of the, myriad things that we're trying to convey.
Absolutely, and I love that you guys did that non-siloed, like, you're like, "I want the holistic thing, I want my model, like, even her own values to be able to speak into that," and I think that really speaks to how creative marketing is even happening right now.
Totally. And it was really fun to play with. And Chrissy was also fantastic to shoot with. And
Uh-huh.
it was funny because, I don't get to work on big campaigns super often because I'm normally, I'm still a really small brand and I'm doing a lot of things kind of bootstrapped. But working with professionals, they almost were like, okay, well, we're shooting a non-model, so we're going to book some extra time, make sure she's comfortable. And she just crushed it. Like she did not need any kind of hand holding. Um, but I feel like what you do get that's different in the final result from working with maybe a non-traditional model is you get a little bit more personality and you get
Mhm.
some approachability, which is fun for us because yes, we're high end, but when you think high end and like luxury marketing, I feel like you think very serious looks and, in terms of what the final imagery looks like and, the model poses and, facial gestures. And we are high end, but we're also like approachable and fun and trying to create a conversation around what does it mean to be sustainable, because for us sustainable doesn't mean anything. So what does it mean to be plant-based, and what does it mean to wear shoes out of apples, and being able to work with a chef and have Chrissy be the face, and even just being able to see her smile and bite out of an apple but still styled in really beautiful wardrobe in a high-end thing. It was like this campaign I feel like was so successful because it did manage to check all of the boxes. And I think putting a really solid team in place and having a really clear vision on what you want your final campaign to convey was, super important for the success ultimately.
Absolutely. I think you guys did a phenomenal job of bringing all the core values together into that whole campaign. It was beautiful.
Thank you so much. I'm really grateful that I had that team in place. They were phenomenal.
Now, I'm seeing sustainable footwear starting to become a part of some of the giants in the industry, including like Nike and Adidas and Converse. I saw them all kind of drop something on Earth Day as well.
Yeah.
How does your narrative differ from what they might be telling or showcasing?
Well, first of all, I'm actually really excited to see so many brands taking an interest in sustainability and really pushing the conversation into really a global space. The reach that these brands have based on what they're doing is only validating that everything else that, some of the smaller, more emerging brands are doing is we're all on the right track. But I think where we differ is that this isn't just our Earth Day ploy. This isn't our capsule collection or our one-off sneaker release where we're trying one new material and saying, we've cracked the code. Like, A, we've been doing this for the last few years already. Like, we have plant-based footwear. It's already on the market. But B, this is our whole collection. It's our whole line. It's everything we do. Like, Earth Day for us is every day, aside from the fact that it's my birthday. Don't celebrate that every day, but like the values that we bring to the space are like, they're not Earth Day dependent. And so I think it's important for us to really say, like, we're excited that the conversation is happening, but we want to make sure that it's not just a sometimes thing. It's not a marketing ploy either. Like, we're not trying to be sustainable because we think that's the cool thing. And if you don't have a sustainable product, then you're not forward enough as a brand. Like, this has been a core pillar for us, and it's who we are. And I think it's really important that we, continue to own that narrative.
Absolutely. And that's what's going to end up ultimately driving really all the content that you put out.
Totally.
Yeah. Well, Casey, thank you so much for being here today. It's so insightful. And I know what we covered was just like one aspect of a huge story, but I'm excited to see how this grows and catches. For those of you listening and curious about exploring more of this awesome fashion-forward, sustainable, luxurious, plant-based footwear brand, head over to sylvennewyork.com. Thanks for listening to the Visual Commerce Podcast.